One of the major things that holds people back from starting their podcast is the editing. Most people do not want to actually sit there and use complicated softwares. And so in this video, I'm going to cover what I consider to be one of the top podcast editing softwares. It has been around for years. I've been using it from the very beginning, and I've been teaching it to my clients all these years as well. I'm going to cover what it is like for you to record, edit, and promote your show with Riverside FM alone. Now, there are of course cases where pairing this with something like a Transcript or a Premiere Pro is a very powerful combination, but for 80% of use cases, you will be able to use Riverside FM alone as your main software. So make sure to stick around till the very end, and I think you will find this useful. My name is Ms. Bahak, by the way. I'm the author of Pod Mahal, and on this channel, I hope to help you own your means of production. If you need a hand with starting or growing your podcast, feel free to book a free podcast strategy call in the description below. You can also dive deeper into my background and some free and paid tools there as well. Now let's dive into why I think Riverside is actually perfect for beginners. So Riverside really shifted when they began to partner with Spotify, and they had access to a lot more resources. There was this period where, there were glitches and annoying things that were happening with it, but they have really come a long way. And some of the tutorials that I filmed years ago look completely different because the inside and the interface and the features available now are completely different. So anyway, let's dive into why I think Riverside FM is worth learning before you go into things like a Transcript and more complicated softwares like a Premiere Pro. Once you get the hang of using some of these tools and figure out which are going to be some of the features that I'm going to be using the most, it is so stupid simple to operate Riverside FM versus it does take a little bit more effort and upfront learning to, get a handle on something like a Transcript. Now, at the moment, they do seem to have a 14-day free trial, so you can mess around with it, see what you think before you even sign up for the paid version. But the paid version has gone up to $29 per month. It's kind of a pro or a business option. There used to be a tier that was $19 a month, but now it's kind of free where you can, explore some of the basic features, or you go up to the $29 per month tier. One thing I'll say about Zoom, if you are paying for the premium version, you can consider moving over to Riverside FM to host a majority of your meetings. You can typically have up to 8 people if you are doing like semi-private coaching calls and things like that, but especially for one-on-one scenarios, it can do exactly what Zoom is doing and maybe even open up an opportunity for you to talk about how you use this for your podcast, right? Let's dive into what it's going to look like when you actually set up your account and you log in. So once you set up your account and you log in, you're going to see these 3 different tabs on the side. Now at the top here, you can see studio. I have several studios for, different shows and things like that. But this is where if you are using something like a Zoom for one-on-one meetings or semi-private calls, you can actually consider canceling the paid version and moving over to Riverside FM. And instead of the name of your show showing up when somebody joins, you can actually create a studio that is like a one-on-one meeting room. And then you can save that link, and that becomes, your new link for whenever people are doing one-on-one calls with you. So that's something you can consider if you are looking to be economical and choosing between a Zoom or a Riverside. Let's start with the scheduling feature that Riverside offers. If you hover over to the schedule tab and you create new session, this area gives you an opportunity to invite people directly inside of Riverside. So if you do not want to use Google Calendar or some other software to basically, book those sessions, you can actually, name this like test guest recording with Misbah, right? And then let's say that I schedule this for, Monday, and it is going to be from 3:30 p.m. to, let's say, 4:45 p.m. Eastern time. I'm just gonna invite myself here. Okay, no, cancel that. Let's delete that because I want to delete my email. And then in this field, of course, you can enter the email of your guest or yourself. And then just like you would set up, maybe an agenda for a meeting, you can actually do that in the description area here as well. Now, these features you can consider later on once you've got the hang of Descript, where you can actually live stream while you are recording. Or if you are live streaming as a separate, you're doing webinars and things like that, you can actually use Riverside as one of the main softwares to go on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, and all of these different platforms that offer live streaming features. But I'm going to assume you're not doing that right now. And so we're going to go over back to the Home tab, hover over to this top bar here, and let's start with the record. If you are doing a guest episode, this is where you're going to start your recording. When you hit that, don't worry, it doesn't start recording automatically. It gives you a chance to set things up. Now, this section of I am not using headphones or I am using headphones, if you choose I am not using headphones, it's going to turn up the background removal feature because it's assuming that there's going to be maybe some feedback from your speakers, and it's going to, protect it and try to prevent it from being picked up in your microphone. So I always recommend, if you can, use headphones and toggle this feature on because it just gives you the more raw and full recording, and you can always add background removal later if it's actually needed, but it's just a way to safeguard the recording. If you and your guest can both wear headphones, simple AirPods will do. That is a big upgrade, but they've considered this button for a reason. So if you're not in that boat, you can select I'm not using headphones. And then of course, these three areas are pretty important where you can select FaceTime, which is showing basically my internal webcam right now, or I use a software called Camo, where if I basically selected that, I can connect my iPhone 15 as a webcam. So I could have the webcam set up right here above where, the typical webcam is. And it's the continuity camera feature that actually works very smoothly in Zoom, where you don't even need Camo to do it. But I find that in Riverside, I know they have released some videos and some workarounds on how to basically make it show up as an option here. But I have found that using Camo is a workaround when and if I really want to do that. And so I've been doing that. But basically, if you have any other camera sources or options, like you are hooking up your DSLR into your laptop to be able to use that, that is going to show up here. Now, the microphone section, make sure that you have selected the interface. So for me, I am using, the Scarlett as my audio interface, and, that is technically what my mic is, but you want to make sure that the right source is selected, because once you hit record, you can't change those things. You'd have to stop the recording and adjust that. And then of course, your speakers. So if you are wearing headphones and you want the output to be, there, you can do that. If you're not wearing headphones, having it be on your MacBook or internal speakers is just fine. Now, this is good advice. I like how Riverside has these little helpful tips that they throw out here and there as you're using it. For example, plugging your computer into a wall outlet for maximum quality. Definitely recommend doing that. And of course, you're going to have to think about, depending on what laptop you're using, maybe needing a dongle to expand, the ports for your computer. Because you have the laptop, you might have a webcam, you might have your mic. And so just consider that if you're going to be using that. The next thing I want to go over is this little section here. You're joining as a host, join as a producer. And so this is a very cool feature that I actually, used with many of my clients, especially for their first couple recordings, if they were nervous and they just wanted somebody guiding it so they could focus on recording and being present with the guest. I can hop on and basically be this invisible participant where, the guest and the host can actually hear me and anything that I'm saying, but the audience cannot. And they may have made some changes or will make some changes to this feature over time, but this is traditionally a very, very useful thing if you are working with somebody in that scenario. This option at the bottom here of join via Riverside desktop app is helpful if your laptop can handle it. So if it can have that application open and it's not slowing things down because of your memory or whatever, then it might be worth doing that, because the desktop app version typically operates smoother than the web-based version. And this is just a general rule. I'm not saying it is true with Riverside. I personally have not really used the desktop app. I haven't really seen a reason to. The browser version works just fine. And so I really like that about Riverside. Now, let's go ahead and join the studio. The reason, by the way, I've left some of these inputs, different than what I just showed you I would do is because I'm recording into it and I don't want to mess that up. Now, let's go over when you hit Join Studio, what you are seeing on the screen here, starting with the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, we have the recording information. So if you expand this, you can see all of the details here. So, okay, live quality means when I'm recording, it's showing up in 720p, but the max quality I have enabled is 4K. So if I did have an input that allowed that to happen, then it's going to record up to that. Now, of course, you can change some of these settings, but let's go over below this. So the host and the producer are the only ones that can see all of the tracks, right? And so this is where I can control if I need to turn down my mic. I could turn this down a little bit, but usually keeping it up all the way is useful. If you hit this caret at the bottom, this basically expands all of what we were seeing when we first joined. So you can see the camera, the mic, the speaker output, and manipulate some of those things. And as you can see, the echo cancellation was automatically turned on because I chose that I was not wearing headphones. And so you can bypass that and turn it off, but I don't recommend doing that if you or your guest are, not wearing headphones. Now let's take a look at the center of the screen. So you've got these two panels here. When your guest enters the room, you can have them be in a waiting room similar to Zoom, or you can have them automatically enter and then they will pop up here. If you are recording solo episodes, Riverside is still a wonderful place to do that, especially if you aren't recording on an external camera, kind of like I am here, where you have 2-3 separate outputs after that and you want everything to maybe be just in one place. And so the way you would do that if you're recording solo is just X out that guest panel, and notice how now I can see the full screen and the frame of what will be showing with me as the main speaker. Now the next thing I want to hit here is this settings icon. When you hit the settings icon, this is where you can get a preview of, are we doing an audio only episode? Are we doing audio and video? I recommend always doing audio and video, even if you have no intention of actually publishing the video, because of course you can do clips later and it's just nice to make eye contact with the guest. It makes for better connection and a better episode overall, especially if you are recording remotely. Now again, the recording resolution, you can change this if you wanted to. Let's say that you're both using a webcam that is not much more than maybe max 1080p, then using this feature is something that works. But if one of you are using, let's say, a 4K webcam, then it might be worth, for the extra boost in quality, to utilize this feature. Next up, let's hit all settings just to expand your studio settings and what it will look like. If we tap general, this is where you can kind of toggle on or off the waiting room settings. I typically think it's nice to have the waiting room so that when you log in, you can actually kind of see yourself, get settled in, and then when you are ready, you can let the guest in. I've actually tried it the other way where this was off, and I prefer having the waiting room enabled. But of course, that's a personal preference. The next section is, of course, the name of the studio and also the name. For example, I could enter my name here. Now, this next section is actually where, if for the episode you wanted to have your title there as well and the title for your guest, they will have an opportunity to do that. You can also toggle that setting off completely if you wanted to. Now, if we toggle over to design here, you can enter your logo, of course, but you can also change up the colors and branding of what this whole studio feels and looks like. And so if you want to change it from purple to, let's say, this bright green, right? Okay, you can have it feeling like that. The background, you can change that if you really want to. So similar to a Zoom room where you can make it feel a little bit personal, this offers you kind of the next level of doing that. Notice how you can change even the name styles and branding around some of this stuff, and I anticipate that they will get more and more advanced with some of this over time. Next up, let's come over to the recording tab here. And then basically we want to make sure again that video and audio is selected. You can have noise reduction on if you want to, but I recommend starting by just doing that on an individual level. So let's say that your guest is the one that needs to turn on the echo cancellation. Let them do that. You can always add noise reduction in post-production when you actually edit this. Switching over to 48 here, if you're doing video and audio, is something it suggests and you can do. And then I always like to select the advanced and up to 4K option over here, but it is a noticeable difference if you hit standard resolution and, it just exports faster. It actually doesn't lag at all. There are few cases where, you might feel lags happening. For example, when I use my iPhone 15, even with something like a camo, there are times where I would notice that lag happening. So, that's just something to consider. With most webcams and stuff, you may not experience that if you select this advanced option. Now, one of the really nice things about Riverside is that the transcript is generated inside of here instead of you having to go to another app to do that. And so you can, of course, select the language that you want, and it will kind of remember that for when you are editing captions and stuff in the future as well. And then, of course, this countdown timer setting, I recommend keeping on. It's kind of nice, but it's a 5-second countdown that shows up on the screen and gives you and your guest a chance to kind of get settled in before, it actually starts. But if you want to turn that off, you can here. And then if you, for some reason, wanted to start the recording as soon as the guest joins, that's something you can do. For, let's say, a rolling start where you want it to feel natural and like you're already conversing, that can be good. But it can also be jarring sometimes for the guest to walk in and they're already, recording. They might feel a little bit just caught off guard. So it's good to give people a heads up if that's what's going to be happening. Because I've been a guest on one where I didn't know that was happening. And I was like, whoa, it just takes you a second to get adjusted. Next up, let's come over to the live stream tab here. Now the live stream tab, this is where I was mentioning earlier, where at any point, if you decide to live stream onto YouTube or LinkedIn or all these different places, you can basically come over to this portal and set up the appropriate connections that you need to. Now let's come over to the advanced tab. Turning on low data mode might actually be worth it if you catch that your guest has really bad Wi-Fi to begin with. Turning this on will basically make it so that everybody's video disappears and, it's still catching everybody's video, so it will be recorded, but just during the live aspect of it, you won't be able to, see the guest or yourself. And so it just does that to preserve bandwidth. Probably it's something you can consider if you find yourself in that situation. Next up, I want to show you a cool feature, which is the script option. So you can actually use this as a teleprompter. What you're going to do first is hit script, and then this is where you would adjust everything that all the questions that you have or whatnot. You can actually make, the font and things like that a little bit smaller, a little bigger. And then when I basically hit the teleprompter button, now what happens is I can see this, as you can see, on screen while I am recording. So if for whatever reason I was recording, let's say a sponsor read, and I wanted to, read through this as it's happening, this gives you an option to do that. You can also increase or decrease the speed. So if, let's say, you had a, 40-second sponsor read and you needed to make sure you hit that, it will kind of do it in a way that seems more natural. Now, one of the things that will happen if you basically switch back to the script feature is when you are recording, it is a pretty small strip at the top. It's not super huge, but that's on purpose. It is to basically make it so you're not looking too much off screen. It's somewhat centered so that the webcam, if that's what you're using, is going to be, it's very near that, so it doesn't look weird. But, I personally find the full teleprompter feature distracting to use in a lot of scenarios, unless you're doing, let's say, short recordings where that might be helpful. But if you like it, you can definitely use it. I think it's a cool option that they offer, and I've hoped that they had this for a long time. So it's been very useful, where instead of toggling back and forth, looking on your phone or having another separate tab open, everything is kind of in this one central place. Next up, if you need to share your screen or your guest needs to share their screen, you can actually do that here, similar to how you would in Zoom, and it's going to record that screen track as a separate track. So it's not going to be just baked into the recording. It can be if you want it to, but with something like a Zoom, you wouldn't have the option to maybe separate those elements. And in Riverside, you kind of have the flexibility where you can. Before you hit record, it's a great idea to double check and hover over these three settings: mic, camera, and your speaker, and make sure that they are the same as they were when you first logged in, and make sure it is for your guest as well before you start hitting record. If you come over to the right, you hit the chat feature. This is something where, if you're doing a live stream, you can actually have that chat going. But if you just want to have a chat between, whisper backstage, that's a cool concept, where you literally, between the host, the producer, and the guests, you guys can be talking on the side. So let's say there is a producer who is giving you pointers or, throwing in suggestions during the recording itself, you're able to have that visible. Just make sure that you or your guest are notified that that's going to be happening, because they may not know to toggle over from this people section over to the chat tab in the middle of the recording session. So if you're going to be using that in a strategic way, make sure to let the people know. Now, coming down here to the brand tab is the same thing that we access through the settings icon over here. This is a much faster way to get to it, but this allows you to customize colors and all of that stuff, which is pretty cool. Now let's come over to the text section. This is pretty cool, because what this can do is, if you wanted to create like a subscribe to my channel, and I wanted this to actually show up at a given point on the lower thirds part of the frame, basically all I would have to do is show that, and then as you can see, there's a timer here, so it's going to disappear, fades out in a pretty clean way. I can make it longer, 20 seconds off. You can do it manually if you really wanted, right? So it's kind of nice if you have those call to actions written out here before. You can use that directly in the recording, so you don't have to add it later in post-production. Now let's come down to the media section. So if you needed to insert like a funny drum roll or laughter or clapping or any custom sound, you could actually add that in this area, and you can play it live while you are recording. That itself also gets saved as a separate track, which is nice for customizability. Now let's go over to the layout section. So the grid option, if you have more than two people, it's going to split into, a full-on grid, right? If you have the speaker split screen, this is where, if you had more than two people, you, the main host or the main speaker, would be the biggest, and then everybody else would be on the side in a smaller frame. So just know that difference between the grid and the speaker split screen. Now, the speaker full screen version is something that I really love, and you would definitely do this for solo recordings, but I would even consider it for your guest recordings, because it allows all eyes to be on the speaker, and it makes it feel less distracting. So people aren't staring at your face while somebody else is talking. All eyes are on them. So consider that when making your choice there. And then of course, these last two options of fill or fit. So if you actually choose the fit version, it leaves a little bit of space, where basically what it does, you can add a background and customize things later, but I kind of like the fill feature where everything is fully kind of, maxed out and all real estate is being used. The next thing to know is, once you and your guest are done recording, so let's say you're like, hey, thanks for coming on, that was awesome, and I basically hit the stop record button, what's going to happen is you and your guest need to leave your computer up for a little while, because what's happening is everything that was being recorded locally is now being uploaded to the cloud. And there will be many cases where you or your guest, close your laptop and move on to something else. It's going to show in the dashboard later that I will show you. And there's a process for being able to solve that. If it happens, it's not a big deal, but just give your guest a heads up that, hey, when we stop recording, just make sure to leave your tab open for, half an hour or so until it's complete, and then you'll be good to go. The next thing I want to show you is this import tab. So if you didn't record inside of Riverside, it used to be that, you couldn't take advantage of some of these editing features that they have, but now you can use it as a full-on editing tool with stuff you recorded outside of here as well. So let's say it was in Zoom and then you want to import it into Riverside, or in other cases where, let's say you used Premiere to basically color grade or do your sound and things like that, and then you want to upload it back into Descript and now use it for your clips. So there are many use cases for when you might use the import button here. Let's say you paste the full YouTube link after it's been published, and again, now you're using it for the magic clips. So there's a lot of scenarios where that could be useful if you are not recording directly inside of here. Now, the next section I'm going to show you is how to edit. So editing is going to be either accessed through this button here. You pick which recording you want to work on, or you go over to the projects tab. Now, let me just switch back here. I'm going to go over to projects. And once I'm here, I'm going to select which recording I want to work on. This recording was quite a while back with my buddy LP out of Montreal. He's an endurance coach. And basically, this is what the folder is going to look like. So you've got the full recording, and then down here are your edits. So these, as you can see, are clips that I made previously, where I can kind of toggle through and see the different ones I did. And any more clips that I make are going to show up in this area as well. Now, the one thing I want to go over is this share icon. So this is very useful because if you are working with an editor or collaborating with somebody, being able to copy this link and share access to everything that's inside here saves you several clicks, saves you from going into your Google Drive and organizing all your files. So this is why it's just a headache-free record inside here. And if you're working with an editor, give them this link and they will have access to all of the individual tracks, all of the clips that you have marked, and all of that good stuff. Something to keep in mind is a shortcut called the M button for marker, I suppose. But basically, while you are recording, if you hit M at any point, it will make a clip and put it in this edits area so you can refer to it later. So if you don't want to forget, you recognize and remember in the moment to mark it, go ahead and, hit the M button in a subtle way. Your guest can do the same thing, and it will automatically timestamp that moment and create the beginnings of a clip for you when you want to do it. Now, when you are ready to edit the full episode, you can either hit the AI version here and hit generate, and it will basically go ahead and do everything automatically. And if you've recorded everything correctly, in many cases, it's pretty good as is. But let's say that you want a little more customizability, you can hit go to editor, and now we are in the editing section. Before, we got to see a lot of what the recording area looked like, but this is what the editor looks like. And as you can see, it's not anything too crazy. It doesn't look super overwhelming, and it's easy to kind of, get your way around once you use it. Now, quick reminder that once you and your guest are done recording, you'll hit the leave button and hit end session for all. But when you do that, you'll want to make sure that you leave the tab open. Both you and your guests do that because Riverside records to the device locally and then it uploads to the cloud. So it is doing that while you are recording, but most of the time there is a little bit of wrapping up that it needs to do once you've ended the session. So make sure that that is complete, because you or your editor will not be able to work on, post-production until these tracks are completed. So many times this can delay your timeline by a couple days, by a week, 2 weeks, if you're not able to get back in touch with the guest again to get them to, finish the upload. And it's pretty easy to do that if you find yourself in this situation. Riverside is aware that that can happen. And so you send them to a link called riverside.fm/upload or something like that. And then basically they leave that tab open and it finishes uploading, and then they can close it out and proceed with their day as usual. Now that we're done recording, I'm very excited to show you what the editing process can begin to look like in your post-production workflow. So you're going to begin by coming over to the Projects tab and then opening up whichever episode you want to work on. At this stage, if you are working with an editor, one of the things that you'll do is hit the share icon in the top right and hit copy link. And what this does is, this is just like copying the link to a folder in Google Drive or Dropbox, and it gives your editor or any collaborator you're working with all of the assets. So everything that you see on this page is going to be what, the receiver of that link is going to see as well. So let me scroll down and just kind of show you what you're going to be seeing. So you've got the full recording here. And if we scroll down, you've got some clips that it's begun to edit. That M button that I told you about, if we were hitting the M button to bookmark clips as we were recording, those also will show up here. Now, if you scroll over to the right here, you can see these are labeled Magic Clip. So these are clips that were already automatically generated to just give me a preview. So as you can see, there's 3 options: Magic Clips, Full Episode, and Edit from Scratch. I always recommend going ahead and doing the Magic Clips and the Full Episode if you have access to the feature, because you can just see what the starting point is. Even if you need to make some customizations or toss away that clip completely, it's interesting to see what the AI is picking up as a good moment. So let's scroll up here for a second. We've got 2 options that I want to show you: show notes and recording files. The recording files is what your editor will appreciate, or you will use if you are using this in conjunction with another software. It is one of those things where most of the time you will be using the high quality aligned video or raw video. The main difference is that if, let's say, see how this is 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 9 seconds. If one of the speakers here was, let's say their track was 10 seconds, 20 seconds longer, or a whole minute longer, it would allow you to see those tracks in a very aligned and matched up format in whatever editing software you'd be using. Now, the cloud backup is also very nice. What this does is it safeguards initial issues that could happen and gives you at least a lower resolution file to work with if there was some mess up during the recording. So it is nice to have that. It's kind of like what Zoom would give you as the main file. That's basically what the cloud version is over here. And then of course, if you scroll down here to the transcript, this is very useful. I recommend taking advantage of the fact that you get a bunch of transcription hours and it generates this with your plan inside of Riverside, because remember, this used to be expensive. And even now with transcription technology, there's limits, right, to how many hours maybe you can use per month on a lot of plans. And so with Riverside, anything you record inside of it, it's going to generate that transcript for you for free. So I always recommend downloading that. And of course, you can always copy and paste to your clipboard directly from here too, but download it so that you have that file, because this is where you can actually take the transcript and you could upload it to your favorite LLM. So it could go into Claude, it could go into ChatGPT, and you can further investigate, hey, what are the best moments for clips? Hey, what are some good pull quotes for me to make a tweet graphic out of? You can begin to take it a bit further using the transcript. And I know that the magic clips and all that stuff that you saw initially is doing that already. It's taking the transcript and using that transcript to find what the best clips will be, right? And it's making that assumption. So it's removing a few steps that you would normally have to do where you take this transcript and put it into ChatGPT. But I have personally found that even with these features available, I like to go in, I can customize the prompts a little bit better. I can really push it to come to the result that I want it to come to. I will do that in conjunction with using these AI features that are built in. And sometimes you will find some clips and moments that did not get picked up by Riverside's AI detector. And sometimes you'll see some overlap, and it's nice to confirm that. Like, what are the show notes that Claude might generate for you based on the transcript and maybe some context that it has about you and your show versus what are the show notes that Riverside will generate. You can kind of compare and contrast if you want to take it a step further. So let's go back here to the show notes section. So if I wanted to access it from here, I'm going to tap show notes. And as you can see, if we scroll down, you've got keywords, and these can be used for tags. So in your YouTube videos and other places where tags are useful, you can, go ahead and do that. A lot of times this is a step that people would skip over because you just didn't have access to it or feel like thinking about it. But since it generates it for you anyways and makes it very easy to copy and paste, you can quickly do that and take advantage of it. And then you've got the summary. So you've got the summary, which can be really nice for your description. And of course, remember, you can take some of this and refine it in your favorite LLM. So if you didn't want to put the whole transcript in there and do all this, from scratch, you can kind of take this initial one and, help customize it a little further. And then of course the takeaways here, which are really nice because each of these takeaways are functioning as a possible tweet idea, a thread idea, a carousel idea, a graphic, a clip that you could redo and shoot again, or a whole nother episode altogether. This section is honestly one of the main reasons to be podcasting in the first place, because you just kind of riff and you mine for ideas. And by the end of an episode, for you to generate the quality of what you might have come up with in conversation may not be possible. You may not have been able to arrive at each of these bullets on your own, but through a conversation or in an episode, it gives you that room to explore, and you end up with a lot of raw, great, tangible, usable information that you can then turn into other pieces of content. So this is a really, really great section here. And then of course there's title ideas, right? So the titles are something that I really heavily will take the transcript, put it in ChatGPT and challenge it to help come up with a great title where it doesn't just sound like nice and clickbaity, but it is actually aligned with the content and it's going to satisfy the listener or viewer. So this is nice that you get several options, and it is an example of something that I would usually go into Claude and double check it to see if I can come up with some other angles for some of these titles, because the title is one of the main things that, gets a chance for your episode to be clicked on, whether you're on audio platforms or you're on YouTube. Now, the soundbite section is really cool as well, because these are direct pull quotes from the episode. And anything that you see here that really resonates with you or that is like 5 to 7 words or less, those things are great copy for your thumbnail. So often one of the challenges with video podcasts is coming up with compelling thumbnails that sometimes go beyond, a picture of the guest and you. And so one of the ways that you can spice it up, even if everything else stays very constant, picture of you, picture of the guest, will be the copy that goes on the thumbnail. So making sure that you choose a really compelling moment or compelling couple words can increase your click-through rate pretty dramatically on podcast players like YouTube. Now let's scroll down to the chapters. So this is really nice because on YouTube, especially if you're doing longer episodes, these chapters really, really help because people can jump around and kind of get to the moment that they want. And also it gives people a chance to preview, hey, do I want to stick around for this episode? You might win someone over by having the right timestamp, right? You're like, wow, okay, this one section on buying back time is something that I want to check out. And so you can often get people hooked with these chapters better than sometimes just the episode description. So one of the things to keep in mind is starting at 0 is kind of important. So when you are putting this in something like YouTube, in order for it to automatically generate those segments and chapters for you, it has to begin at 0 in some format, and then the rest of the timestamps are pretty easily detected. Now, again, just taking a quick scan at all of the output that it has given me for my show notes, it's actually not bad, because what you would have to do is definitely some back and forth with a ChatGPT or a Claude, especially if it has no previous context on you or your show or your business. And so clearly Riverside has put some effort into making the parameters so that a lot of the annoying things that you would get back as output from a ChatGPT, and it would take like 5 prompts for you to kind of get to something you like, it does seem like tools like Riverside are getting better and better at that, which is great because these features are not just like these dead sounding good features that you won't really use. It's actually something that will become more usable over time. And I can tell you that from just seeing the text output that it's giving me. I've been using Riverside for years on and off. And so being able to see the differences in its output there and in the magic clips that it uses, it's getting better and better with language there. Now, real quick, let's scroll all the way down here to the social snapshots. This is kind of cool because you would not expect Riverside to go as far as including some of these animated versions that you're seeing. Like, they've always had some of these basic ones like the laptop mock-up and things to kind of plug Riverside's brand in there. But I think they're actually getting better at some of the still frames that they are locking in. And as you can see, when we got to the beginning here, right, this animated version, this is not something that previously they would have taken the time to just include, right? But because it's becoming more accessible, it's cool because that stuff will be directly embedded in Riverside. They seem like a software and a brand that is going to be tackling some of those features and tackling some of the templates that are trending on social and things like that. Okay, now let's go back to that main page that we started on. And what I'm going to do now is begin the editing process, right? So let's go ahead and hit generate on the full episode. And I'm also going to hit generate on the magic clips. When you do that, you're going to see some parameters and preferences come up. Do you want them to be 30 to 60 seconds, under 30 seconds, longer than a minute and a half? I like to leave this on auto just to see what it picks up initially. You can always trim things down if you need to further, but I like seeing, what else it includes. And so I'll leave it there on auto. Focus on speaker. This is a nice option, right? So if we wanted to focus on clips of my guest here versus just clips of me, this is very useful, but let's just leave it on auto so that it can maybe pull some of the best of both of us here. And then of course, if you want to guide it by looking for certain keywords, you would go ahead and enter some of those keywords in here. And this is nice because if you remembered a moment, right, you don't remember the full question, you don't remember exactly the answer, but you remember a keyword around something you wanted to make a clip out of, it's good to include that here. But I am going to leave it blank just so you can see what it generates. And as you can see, it'll take a second here to generate the full episode. And as you can see here, it looks like it's doing its thing, generating the clips. Okay, once everything's finished generating, if you just hit show all in the edits, what this does is it pulls up everything, right? So now let's scroll all the way down to the bottom. This is the full episode that was generated automatically without me hitting any buttons, without me doing anything right after it was recorded. And then you've got these magic clips that it seems to have generated, without me hitting anything as well. And now from this point on, okay, this is the one that we just did now. So while I was recording, I hit generate clips, I hit generate full episode. And as you can see, it did it again. What I think is cool to see here is the differences, okay? So the first initial round of magic clips that were generated, what are the titles? What are the durations? Are they the exact same clips, right, as what it came up with in the second round, right? As you can see, there are some that are different. It's not exactly the same. And so I like to test that and see if it will give me some new clips, because volume is really the key here. The more volume and options that you have to choose from, the better time that you'll have in your workflow. If it just gave me 3 clips, and I was like, wow, okay, none of these sound great, they don't really do the episode justice, I would be disappointed. But the fact that it just generates like over 5 to 10 for you if you ask it to, and it can do that again, right? You can run it again to go for more specific ones. So before I chose auto, right, in this first round of output, but let's say I go back and hit generate clips again for under 30 seconds, it might pull out different moments. And so I really think that's a useful feature that doesn't take too long for you to get this output. But of course, I'm going to start with the episode that I want to edit. So this right here is going to be the AI generated full episode button that I hit. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit edit there. And now this is the editing interface. This is what you are going to get used to seeing if you're going to be using Riverside to make a lot of your edits. And more particularly, instead of just relying on the full episode, you're making a couple tweaks, you're removing certain things. So if you're going to be doing that, you'll be spending more time in here. And if it is just to chop beginnings and ends off and double check things and using a lot of the magic clips as they are, you won't need to spend too much time. You'll just kind of use this area to double check things. So let's start with this button right here. If you press this, this is where you can change the aspect ratio. So 16:9 right now, as you can see, it tells you it's the landscape wide version for YouTube and Spotify. If you are going to be making clips, of course, we would hover down over to 9:16. But in this case, because we are working on the full episode, I'm just going to kind of look for certain things that, you know, I can trim. But let's just say that I've already done that, right? Let's go up to the top and just delete this line just for the sake of it. So I highlight all of this, I hit delete, and it took that section out. If I wanted to restore that, I can very easily do that. Now, notice how when I hit a word, it gives me the option to add, correct, and do some of these things. So correct is what you would use if you were just trying to correct the spelling. So for example, my name is always spelled wrong. So I would go ahead, highlight this, and I would correct it, you know, to the proper spelling. And what this does is if I'm going to be using this segment for clips, that transcript is going to reflect in the captions that are shown. So that's where you would use that. But now let's say that I wanted to highlight this entire section right here, and I want to use it to show you this add button. So if I hit add, it gives me the option to insert images, videos, music, text, all of that stuff. And so what this is equivalent to is like in Descript, where I can basically use text-based editing, right? I can highlight this section, I can hit add video, and that would be very similar to layering B-roll on top of the main video. And I didn't even have to mess too much with the timeline all the way down here, right? I can do it completely from this section. So that's really cool. It'll be something that probably comes in handy when you are working on your clips. As you are reviewing your full episode, you might stumble upon a special moment that maybe wasn't caught on a magic clip. And you're like, you know what? I want to make sure to turn this into a clip. So what you would do is highlight that section. And then this button over here next to the trash can that has the plus icon, create new edit. Okay, if I basically hit that, as you can see, it just added that to one of my clips. Next up, let's come over to after the aspect ratio area, this main project section. So if I hover down here, it gives me the option to basically jump between projects. So for example, all the way up front here, this first one is, I believe, the clip that I just generated or cut. Now, next to the aspect ratio section, you will notice that if you hit this button, you can kind of jump around to other projects and open that up in your timeline without having to go back. So that's what that does here. Now, let's also look at this sidebar. So these dashes are really symbolizing kind of the chapters, right? So if you hover over this, you can scroll down and you can kind of quickly jump to the 45-minute timestamp that's in your show notes. This can make it a little easier because as you can see, the surface area of how much you have to kind of read, I know I can pull this down maybe a little bit, but it's like it is kind of limited, right? So being able to use that or being able to use the search feature to find like AI. Okay, how many times did we say AI in this? There's 99 times that there is the mention of AI. So you can use that search function to really find very specific moments, especially if you know that you messed up. So for me, if I remember after an episode, oh man, there was this one awkward moment, and I can recall that word that it was, you can very quickly narrow that down and see how many times it was mentioned, jump through all of these instances, and all that good stuff. Okay, next up, let's take a look at this 3-dotted icon over here. This is what you would click to basically download the transcript from here if you didn't do it from the dashboard. downloading subtitles, which you probably won't need, copying the transcript directly from here, or copying the chapter list. So this is all stuff that you can do in the dashboard, but if you are doing it while you're editing, that's how you would access that. Next up, what's really nice is that in the timeline, things are color coded, right? So purple is my guest here, green is me. So you can kind of quickly jump to see who's talking pretty quickly. And then this 1x area is how you can increase or decrease the playback speed. So if you are watching this for the third time and you want to speed things up, you can very easily do that here. You can also jump back 5 seconds forward, 5 seconds backwards pretty quickly using these features. And then if you tap this button, this basically is going to minimize the tracks or expand them. I personally like keeping it expanded, and I like seeing everything that is in the timeline. So I would usually leave that on. And then of course, if you aren't using like a trackpad where you can actually do this, using your mouse pad, this area is how you zoom in and how you zoom out on a certain section on your timeline. And of course, if you're not using the timeline at all and you want to hide it temporarily, it gives you some more real estate on the screen to be able to read some of the text, which can be really nice. A shortcut to remember is S. What that does is right here, it splits the section. If let's say I'm right here and I hit the S button, it's automatically going to make a cut in that area. So that can speed things up for you if you memorize some of these shortcuts that you'll find yourself using often. Also, looking at the timeline, this section right here is pretty cool because if you basically hit the plus icon, what this allows you to do is upload a hook. So let's say that this is starting the conversation from, hey, welcome to the show, all that good stuff. But let's say I found a really interesting moment, right? That was like right around the 14-minute section, okay? And if I basically want to take that section and maybe I spiced it up, I did something cool in Canva and made something cool out of that moment, made it a nice hook, and I want to basically add that to the very, very front, you could upload that as a normal upload or as an edit. So if I'm using Riverside as the editor to design the hook, I basically would hit edits and you would choose the actual clip that was used to create that hook. And so that's another example of when you find the right hook, being able to highlight that and, put it into basically a new, so this is where if you find a hook that you really, really like as you're looking through, highlighting that and adding it as a new edit can be very useful because you go to that new edit and now there's where you can layer all the B-roll and text and anything that you want to make it more hooky, and then you can basically add that up front and it will seamlessly kind of ease into the rest of your episode. Now, what's also kind of cool is if you hit add music, you can see that there's some licensed tracks that are, easily accessible already. And so you can go ahead and kind of layer in certain music or sound effects through this if it works and fits for your episode. But this is where you would add your own by hitting upload if you have a steady track that you normally use for your intro or outro music, for example. Now, the next thing I want to show you is on the video itself. If you basically hit the video frame, you'll see some of these options pop up. The first one is going to be minimize, right? So if I did that, what it does is it changed the layout to basically have both of us. But let's say I want to hit maximize, and notice right now it's only covering my speaker. I would basically just hit that and it will take us back to full screen. Now, the next one is going to be hide. So if, let's just say for this section, if I wanted to hide this completely and I wanted something else to show here, that's how you would do that. Hit undo to bring things back. Now, the third button that you might actually use from time to time is going to be the crop feature. So if I hit this crop feature, notice how the grid pops up, which is really nice because usually you want, your eye line to be on one of these lines and sometimes to be intersecting between one of these lines, right? But in this scenario, this actually is a great example of what I normally say, which is making sure that you and your guest are framed up already and kind of even. And as you can see, like for my track, my eye line is already set up here for the most part probably. And for my guest, they're below. So if I wanted to crop things just a little bit, as you can see, I can zoom in a little bit more. I can move the eye line up so that it is now falling in this area. So you can make tiny adjustments like that, which actually was not very easy or intuitive or even possible back in the early stages of when Riverside first came out. So that is cool to see all of the advancements they've made in the editor. Okay, now this last button here is the track settings, which I can show you is going to be here on the right hand side as well. So we're going to shift over to this right hand side bar, and I want to start with the AI producer. This is very useful and is very similar to what Descript's Underlord area looks like. There isn't as much as Descript's typically has, but it has all the main stuff here, right? So if you look at removing pauses, okay, it already did that. Removing filler words. So if I wanted to go ahead and cut 447 ums and uhs, I can go ahead and in one click, it's going to completely remove everything. Now, if I want to, let's say, see what part should I remove for clarity, even though in my mind I know, I don't know if I really want to cut anything. It is kind of nice to see what does it recommend that I cut, and it was only 3 sections. It might actually be useful. It gives you kind of its reasoning, and if you skip out on it and want to come back to it, you just kind of hit this button, hit review, and you can easily do that. And then of course down here you've got some other features that you've got the magic audio to make your sound better, if you need to mute out background noise and things like that, and then layouts and eye contact stuff, right? So you may not be using some of this stuff as often. You might stay in the top 3 area here, but these 3 features are still very useful. And notice how the pauses were actually something that were removed in the AI edit already. So when I hit generate full episode, that was one of the things it detected and decided to do. And then if I want to, I can go ahead and continue to increase. So for example, 1.5 seconds or more, if I cut this down a little bit, what this is doing is 3 seconds or more. Anything that is a pause longer than 3 seconds, it's going to cut. Okay, this was at, I believe, 1.5 seconds, right? And so now if we increase it, this is now 1 second. And sometimes I do this where I keep it on actually 0.5 seconds, right? So if you're trying to do a YouTube video and keeping it retention focused, and maybe it's a solo episode and you want to kind of keep things moving, it may be worth it for you to use this. And so it is nice. You can't actually do anything in between, right? So I can't go between 0.5 seconds and 1 second. It is in 0.5 increments versus something like a Descript allows you to get those, like, I want to be 0.6 seconds instead of 0.5. But if that doesn't matter to you, then I think this could be really, really well, keeping a nice, balanced pace throughout the episode. Now, let's come over to the track section. So the tracks is where we can see the individual speaker tracks, and we can make some adjustments if we need to. So let's expand my guest's speaker track. If let's say that their volume was not as high, I could go ahead and crank things up here, right? And this is not just going to be applied to this specific scene or section. This carries over into the entire track. And you can see if I increase this, look at the waveforms at the bottom, they got larger, right? So it is immediately reflected. The magic audio can be a hit or miss, right? Sometimes it works and it's great. And so you can turn that on and it basically goes and does all these things automatically, and it analyzes your whole episode and it gives you kind of its version. Sometimes I find, and this is not just Riverside alone, this is just any editing software, like Adobe's beta version in Premiere did this, where the audio improvement cleanup was too much, where it almost took away certain words that I was saying. It didn't catch it. It faded things in and out at the wrong part. So I sometimes don't like using this, but in some cases, this might be actually the better option for you, especially if you're recording in a predictable environment and you recorded with decent sound already. This saves you some headache from having to fiddle with some of these individual things. Now, let's say that you want to round out the sound and add some EQ. What you're going to do is just toggle that on, and this gives you some options. So you can customize this further here if you really wanted to, but if you want kind of a quick preset, you hit the drop down, you can choose default, you can, go with crisp or clear. There's all sorts of options here that you can kind of experiment with and see what suits your voice the best. Looking all the way at the bottom here, this is a very useful feature because anytime you are recording something remotely, there's a chance of sync issues and audio drift and things like that. And so Riverside is aware of that. They've had their version of issues over the years. They've fixed a lot of this stuff to where it doesn't happen very often anymore. But if it does, this is where you can kind of mess around and adjust some things without having to use a whole new software. Back in the day, you would have to, export it out and make some advanced adjustments and something that could handle it, like a Premiere Pro. But it's nice to see that they have, made some adjustments here where you can fiddle around and possibly fix your issue all in one software. Next up, let's go to the brand tab on the right-hand side. This is where it can be particularly useful for you to actually get some of these things uploaded if you use it over and over. For me, one of the things that I would use pretty often is going to be the outro. So I have an end screen for, let's say, my Habit Chest podcast, and then I have one for Pod Mahal Shorts as well. And so depending on which clip I'm working on, being able to quickly add that outro in this format is very nice. So I'm going to go with 916, and I would basically have had that file uploaded here, and it would now save in my library. What's really cool is that if you do this in all the different formats, like you edit it in Canva and then you export it out in all of these aspect ratios, you can add them here once and it basically is automatically taken care of, right? In your vertical clips, when you want this outro to be added, it's going to automatically do that, which is really nice. Choosing your default captions and all of this stuff can be very useful as well, especially if you've already decided some of this. Something I hate about Descript, and I know that they're probably going to change this in the future, but it's like every time you go to caption a video, you basically have to choose one of the presets from scratch. You can't just choose blank, or you can't just kind of reuse something that you have decided, hey, this is the shadow I want, this is the, font I want, and I want to keep this consistent every time. That would save a ton of time for people using Descript. And so I like to see that here in Riverside, that they're already thinking of that and they have made it so that you can retain some of the stylistic options in your workflow. Color palette is another one. So if you have a brand identity guide already, or you've thought of this like what my primary and secondary colors are, you can basically go ahead and add those here. It's always nice to go add the exact hex codes if you have them, just for accuracy, but similar to how you do this in a Canva, right? If you added all of it once, it's very, very easy with every design that you make moving forward. So very similarly for every clip and every edit that you do, offloading some of these decisions in this brand section can be very helpful. Now, one more thing I did want to show you is the design tab. This is where if you had this background, right, that was branded and you wanted to kind of customize some of that every time and the clips are overlaid on that background, you can go ahead and add that here or adjust some of those things here. If you want more of a squared radius versus, a rounded one, you can make some of those customizations. Those are the tiny decisions that, even though they're a couple seconds at a time, it adds up over the weeks. So let's go ahead now and dive into the layout tab on the right hand side. This is very useful because this is where you're going to choose what the actual format on your screen looks like. For full episodes, I actually prefer using full screen. So whoever the speaker is going to get all of the airtime. There's no distraction of like, what's my face look like while my guest is talking? But let's say that you wanted that, right? You want to keep both people in the frame. Then, hey, you've got the grid option, which can be everybody has 50-50 real estate there. Picture in picture can be really nice as well. So this is like, you can see a small version in the top right and you can maybe move that around. Or if you hit smart layouts, what this does is it automatically switches things throughout the episode. So you'll get some that are full screen. You'll get some where you're in the grid format. And this can be really nice because it reduces visual fatigue, right? So if you're used to actually, like the grid option is nice. You can see both people on the screen, but there's not much changing or movement, right, that's happening when you are in that frame. So that's why I like the full screen. It can actually incorporate some of that movement every time the speaker switches as well. But the smart layouts takes that a step further, and it will blend a bunch of these to be able to kind of give you the best output. Usually you are going to keep the fill option on, but the fit would really be if you had a background behind this and it was going to basically shrink the real estate that your speakers would have. This feature that I'm showing you is even more useful when you are looking at a clip. So for example, if I just switch this to 9:16, being able to look at a vertical aspect ratio clip and go, oh, awesome. Do I want to have, the grid option for this? It might actually look good. Or maybe I do want to keep full screen, or maybe I want to lean into smart layouts for this in particular, because we do want some things switching up and, being able to pattern interrupt throughout. And this is a simple way of doing that without adding any extra B-roll or animations. Okay, now let's go over to the music tab on the right-hand side. This is, again, the same music tab that you accessed from the timeline, which basically gives you, those free options that you can use if you really want. Now, let's come down to the captions area. This is where you will be able to see a bunch of the presets, right? So if you did not want to customize it the way that we did in the brand kit, you could go ahead and use some of the things that are here to start with. This can be really nice because as there are trending caption styles, Riverside and other softwares out there will do a decent job of trying to incorporate it. For example, this one that you're seeing, the karaoke style with the white background, like this is to kind of mimic the popular style that is built in on Instagram Reels. So when you are captioning your videos, if you like one of these, you can begin there and then you can customize some of it from there. So for example, if I was to hit this one, as you can see, I can kind of enlarge things. I can move it around. I now have a bunch of options for the style here, for the font, for the size. You can make all of these customizations. Now let's come down over into the upload section. This is where all of your outros, all of your images, all your B-roll, any of that stuff that you're working with is going to be showing up. Now, if I ended up hitting record here, it's going to take me back to the studio, which I don't want to do. So we're going to skip over that. Let's come over to images. Images is very similar to the music tab where you've got all these licensed tracks that you can use and incorporate without going into a Canva or Envato. You can kind of do the same thing with some images here. So when there is a piece of B-roll that you need to find, to be able to do a very quick search is useful. And the same thing applies for video. So if you hit the videos tab here, what this is going to do is give you royalty-free videos. So instead of needing a bunch of B-roll and having a subscription to that place like an Envato or a Storyblocks, this gives you access to a decent amount of stuff. Now, of course, it's not perfect, right? It's stock at the end of the day. So you will have limitations, but the options are pretty decent. As you can see, there's a lot of variety. And one of the cool things that you'll see is that it gives you smart suggestions, right? So it's taking the language that is in the transcript and it's doing a decent job of trying to think, okay, what B-roll might actually apply here? And right now, this feature isn't going to be amazing, but this is going to get deadly over time, right? Where it can actually do a good job of taking the decision making that comes with choosing the right piece of B-roll and doing that at scale to have a, very visually pleasing video. It's going to speed up that process, which will really come in handy with clips and promotion. Now let's hover down to the text tab. This is where you can actually add some lower thirds text and you can customize it. So if you had chosen some of the styles that you want in your brand kit, this is what is going to show up. And then it has some presets that you can begin with, which can be useful for adding certain things like subscribe and like and check the links in the description and things like that. Now let's say that I'm happy with my edit and I'm ready to export. I'm going to hover over to the top right section here, but before I show you that, I want to show you this share icon. If you hit copy link here, the same way that you showed, if you're sharing with an editor all the project files, they can get access to that. You can actually collaborate with somebody on the timeline, right? So if your editor finished up everything and they wanted to send you a preview link, they could copy this and you could kind of take a look without the full file being rendered and exported, right? This can be useful if you're getting approval from a guest or from somebody on your team about something to quickly be able to share that. Now let's go over to the export tab. So this is where you can adjust some of these settings. So if somebody was shooting in 4K and you want to make sure that you have access to that in the final output, this is where you would make that change. If you want to remove the watermark, which I definitely recommend doing, if your plan allows it, go ahead and do that. That's basically Riverside's branding and them plugging themselves. Normalize audio levels and remove background noise. Now, in the past, I have done 3 separate exports. So I will do, let's say, one where it's exported like this. Then I would toggle this on with normalized audio levels and then hit export again. And sometimes I would test it again with the remove background noise feature. I found after doing this for a while that I didn't really like the removing background noise feature unless I had to turn it on. And what I don't like about it is that it overcorrects, right? It almost kind of over removes certain noises and can kind of sound a little too edited. So that's a hit or miss though, right? So if you find yourself in that position where you need this feature, go ahead and do it and see what you think. But I like to test. And so I've seen what each individual track looks like. The normalizing audio levels can be really nice, especially if one of the speakers has, the gain wasn't turned up very high, or, you speak a little bit lower like me. What this does is it just brings everything up to a normal speaking volume, because it can be quite annoying when one speaker is super loud and then when it switches speakers, you have to turn up the volume to kind of keep up with that. So this feature can be very useful. Just make sure when you actually hit this and when you export it, that it sounds good, right? Because remember that you weren't able to actually adjust this on an individual speaker level before. Like if I came over to the tracks area and I hit this speaker, I can, crank up the volume here, right? And make sure that it's balanced perfectly to my ear before I hit export. That is the better, more customizable way to do it. But let's say you didn't touch that and you just want a quick option. You want to export like that, go ahead and do that. But let me hover over to the audio tab just so I can show you the options here. If you need to preserve, storage and you're trying to look for an MP3 file, that's going to be smaller in size. And so you can use that, but WAV is definitely like the highest quality. So if that doesn't matter, go ahead and export in that. And then again, these same options that we saw here in the video tab comes up there. And now let's take a look at the timeline export. This is particularly useful if you are using Riverside in conjunction with another software, which I very commonly do, and a lot of people do it, which is why they have actually made this. So you've got Premiere and you've got Final Cut. Now, what's crazy is there used to be Descript in here. And as you can see, they're now competing with it almost in many ways, where I don't see that as an option. But anyways, the Premiere is what you would select if you're me and you basically want to be able to edit all this stuff in a Premiere project file. Now, this timeline tab you're mainly going to use only if you or your editor are going to be using Riverside in conjunction with Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. And what this does is it gives you a very seamless transition from making your edits in Riverside and continuing your workflow in a Premiere Pro, where you can you have unlimited customization options. Similarly, you have that in Final Cut as well. But since I'm covering this video in a way where we're trying to use Riverside for basically everything, you can skip over that and really just worry about what you select in the video tab section. And then once you're happy with all of this, go ahead and hit export. And then you're good to go. It's going to basically take a second to do that, but then we can hit keep editing and then move on to editing some other clip. So now let's exit this editor here just so we can take a look. Now let's come over to the edit section. We're going to hit show all. And this full episode that we're seeing the copy of, that is going to be the edited version that is ready to go. So up top here is where you can customize the name of the file, so it's easily referenceable when you need it. But then let's go ahead back to the export tab, and we're going to repeat this process for the audio just like we did with video. So in the audio tab, if I want to keep it consistent with what I did in the video, I would toggle on this normalize audio levels thing, and then go ahead and hit export. If you are doing what I said earlier, which is you're exporting multiple versions just to see how some of these features affect the quality of your file, that is where you want to make sure to rename the file name so that it's easily trackable. And I like to include that in the file name itself. So like normalized audio or removed background, I will include that in the file name so that I can quickly tell the differences when I need to. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is when you come down to the edit section, once you hit export, you have to wait a couple minutes until it is done exporting. It will give you kind of a notification that it's done. And in this case, for the audio, as you can see, when I hover over the screen, it is now showing the download option. So this, if I hover over onto the video version, notice how that download option is not there yet. So that will show up once it is basically ready to roll. So my audio version is done. I'm going to hit download here and then go ahead and just, rename it or save it. And now it is on your computer, and that is the file that you upload to your host. Similarly, you're going to do that same thing with the video version that you just edited. All right, awesome. As you can see, it just gave me the notification that my video version is done. So it did take a couple minutes, but let me now hover over the video just to show you. Wonderful. So this is what the preview link looks like, by the way, if you shared this with somebody. But once you open this, if I hit download here, I could basically download it to my computer, just like I did with the audio file. And if you are publishing and hosting on Spotify directly, you could technically publish from here. But if you're not, and you don't want to kind of deal with the hassle of that connection, I would just make sure you get the actual file onto your computer and then go ahead and upload it to the host separately. Now, I showed you how to download from the preview link, but let's just say that I didn't click that and I was trying to download it from my edit section here. I have to scroll down because this is the one that I need to export. And so notice that I can see the download icon here, versus on something like this, I cannot see the download icon, which means I have not exported it yet, or it has not finished exporting. But once this is ready to go, you hit download, save it to your computer, and then you're going to upload that file to YouTube or Spotify or wherever you'd like. If, again, you are connected directly to Spotify and for some reason you'd like to push it out directly from Riverside, you can go ahead and do that as well. That process that we just went over is what you would rinse and repeat for any clip that you wanted. So remember, there's tons of short form clips here, which you're going to do this with, but I urge you to not forget about the long form clips, because if you are doing an hour-long episode, 30-minute episode, there is likely a 5-minute segment, a 10-minute segment that could be packaged up and republished as another upload. And that might get even more traction than the full episode itself. So don't just use Riverside for the short form vertical clips. Those are great too. Make sure to incorporate some medium and long form clips into your strategy as well, because as you saw today, the software isn't limiting. A couple years ago, this was. Okay, you couldn't do everything in here. It was a bit of a hassle to play with this a little bit. And so now this is in a very good spot where this could be, for most beginners, the only software that you use for quite some time. And you won't run into any limitations. And of course, if and when you do, there's always, you've learned some skills that will translate over to other modern editing softwares. But I think Riverside is a very approachable and friendly one to get started with. And you might as well learn it if you plan on doing your recordings in here. So I hope this was useful and opened up your mind a bit to what is possible and made you feel ultimately more capable in owning your means of production and being able to sustain this podcast. I think Riverside will be a big help in your process. Make sure to check out the links in the description below. I offer a free podcast strategy call if you need some more one-on-one support. But thanks again for hanging out, and I will see you on the next one.